So can you hear me?
Hey Monique, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay,
Okay,
great.
perfect. Let's just wait a couple of minutes and then we'll get
Okay.
started.
Okay, great. I'm just testing out the air jack because I think you should be able to hear me a little bit better.
Are you able to change the slides? I think you should be able to, yes?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, so other than that, do I need to hit anything else?
No, you're okay. You're completely okay.
Okay, and you're hearing me fine?
Yes, I'm hearing you perfectly.
Okay, great.
So as I mentioned before, I apologize for the low turnout,
It's
but
okay.
this is being recorded and we will be using it to broadcast to our followers.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Definitely looking forward to it.
Okay, so should I just wait a few more minutes?
Let's give it another 2 minutes or so.
Okay, sure.
Okay. I'll let you know when to start, okay?
Okay, great.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Okay, um, So, uh, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for choosing to attend this webinar. I will hopefully be able to impart some wisdom for you in terms of kind of what I've gone through with my own journey for how I've gotten here and then sort of all the steps that I've taken to get here. So as it sort of states on the first slide, my name is Monique Anderson. I am currently a graduate student in the University of Virginia Medical Scientist Training Program. And so what this is a National Institutes of Health accredited MD PhD program. And I've completed 3 out of the 4 years of my clinical training. And then I am currently completing the research portion of which I've done 3 years. And I'm in the unique position of being able to complete my research at the National Institutes of Health through the Graduate Partnership Program. The NIH is a fantastic clinical research facility where both clinical and bench-based research occur, but they actually do not confer degrees. And so how this works is that there's a partnership between my school and the NIH that allows me to finish my work there, but UVA will actually give me my degree. And I'm doing this research in the lab of Dr. Stephen Jacobson at the NIH as a predoctoral ERTA fellow. So one of the things that's important to note is that at least when I was growing up, I actually never imagined that this is what I would end up doing. Growing up, I wanted to be a teacher, a doctor, or a lawyer, pretty much any combination of all three, if you were to ask my parents. But I guess when I think about sort of how I got here, it started off with some sort of more basic principles. So just to kind of take a step back, I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. My parents had immigrated from Jamaica just prior to my birth. And I actually gained a lot of insight as well as a lot of inspiration from them because, of course, I learned a lot in terms of their work ethic as well as sort of some of their own, some of the things that they took through life. But my parents had also started off in Jamaica as teachers. And so even though when they came over here, they could not become teachers, since especially at that time, they weren't really hiring recently immigrated educators. A lot of what went into my schoolwork was taken from what they usually taught their students. So I was very lucky in the sense that even if, let's say, the material that I had at school wasn't necessarily up to par, my parents would often supplement it with what they knew to be right and the methods that they would teach. And so I think that definitely gave me an advantage that perhaps maybe some of the other students did not have. And then, of course, it also really placed education as a primary goal and objective in my life. They always pushed that everything that I wanted to achieve could be achieved through a good education. And so I guess just moving forward, what this meant was that within the New York City public school system, I was definitely encouraged to, do well. And even though I'm not really sure like how many students here are from New York City or are familiar with basically how it's structured, but like a lot of public school systems around the country, resources can be pretty tight, but they also have a lot of accelerated programs and what they call magnet programs that are available to students through testing. And so this means that very early on, I was exposed to standardized testing. Even as early as first, second grade, I was taking national exams yearly, usually 2 to 3 times a year in terms of just assessing the critical math and reading skills. And then as I went through to junior high school and more of these sort of magnet programs opened up, I would have to take standardized tests to enter those programs. So for junior high school, I know that I took 2 separate exams. But even at that point, I had become very used to taking these timed examinations. And I think having that practice was actually really important for me, and it was something that I just became used to throughout my schooling. But I guess like at the stage of junior high school, I entered Andrews Hardie Junior High School in their magnet program that was called the Center for the Intellectually Gifted. That's really not that important, but it allowed me to basically be in a program that was that very much emphasized math and science. And math was my favorite subject, and it was something that I excelled at because I just seemed to be doing it all the time. Even when I had a set number of problems that I was supposed to do, I would do extra on the side. And so this kind of goes into what I want to talk about as my next point in terms of test taking and basically getting used to doing sort of these types of exams. So, of course, you have the exams that you have for school that are structured a little bit differently than what you would see for a standardized test. But one of the keys to either of those types of examinations is that you practice, and more practice. So I know that sometimes I would get caught up in the material that I had and
All
feeling like,
attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
all right. So a lot of what I got used to, and sometimes I would get caught up in, is feeling as though I didn't have the material down, and so I would continue studying maybe until the last minute, and sometimes not realizing that doing the questions themselves was actually more beneficial. So that's something that I would definitely recommend. So do the questions and go over the explanation for the questions that you answered incorrectly, as well as the ones that you actually guess at and manage to get correct. This is a way to not only pare down the amount of time if you're in a sort of time crunch before an exam, because you're going to have to learn the principles as you go through and read through the explanations. The other thing that I would recommend is, and the reason why the practice is so important, is that you get very used to time test taking, and it no longer becomes as pressurized of a situation when you're used to allotting yourself a minute, 2 minutes per question, used to giving yourself 5 minutes perhaps at the end to go through your answers, and then sort of fill out the ones that you don't necessarily know as well. The other thing that's really important, especially at this stage of like junior high school, is being really well rested. A lot of, again, there were times that I thought that I could cram in maybe one more chapter right before an exam, and as I got older, I realized that it was far more important for me to go to sleep than it was for me to go through that material, because the last thing that you want is to be taking that exam and falling asleep, or struggling to remember something because your mind isn't sharp due to lack of sleep. It's going to be a lot better if you're alert and better able to go through all of the questions as opposed to falling over asleep on your questions. The other thing is to become a smart test taker. And this ends up applying more to the standardized exams than it does to maybe your subject tests. And actually, it's something that can apply to any of the multiple choice exams that you do. So, and I'll illustrate this by pointing out one of the many standardized exams, such as the SAT, that you will have to go through. And this is that some of these exams have this principle of guessing hazard. And what this means is that as opposed to maybe one of your subject tests where every question that you get wrong, you lose a point, in some of these exams, the loss for an incorrect question is actually less than a point. It can be either a quarter point or some variation of that. And what it's actually designed to do, at least in my feeling, is that yes, it kind of is a tick off of, okay, well, you know, like if you just guess randomly, you'll lose like a quarter of a point. But it also is an advantage because it means that it's better for you to answer a question no matter what and not leave it blank, even if you don't know something, as opposed to just skipping over it, because it would just be zero as opposed to perhaps actually gaining a point. And so this calls into play the ability of doing like the educated guess again versus keeping the answer blank. And again, this is far more important for an exam like the SAT or even like the MCAT, all of which I've like gone through and very much operate on similar principles. And then this again becomes more important for high school and college and beyond, sort of knowing which exams to take and which ones to skip. So this applies more to sort of the AP exams and SAT subject tests. And as an example, I will kind of talk about, I think I took a French SAT subject test. And one of the things that was, in retrospect, I realized that even though I was proficient in French and definitely prepared for it, I had actually managed to jam my left hand the morning of the exam, right before I had to take that test. And even though the left hand is not my writing hand and I could feasibly go through the exam, I was in a lot of pain, and because of that, had a really difficult time concentrating on the material. I ended up really not doing that well. Luckily for the SAT subject test, you have the choice of releasing those scores to the schools or not, and I knew immediately that there was no way that I was going to be able to release those scores without knowing my exam grade. And so I ended up just not releasing them. But, that's not necessarily the case for every type of exam, voluntary exam that you take. So sort of know where you are on the material and know how prepared you are. And if, leading up to it, you just really do not feel prepared, you don't feel good about it, it may not hurt to actually reschedule it. So that's just sort of another tip that I would put in. So moving on, and I guess kind of coming back to my own story, at this point I was in junior high school and I had already taken the exam to get into my junior high school, but as I said, for the New York City public school system, it is a very large system that serves a lot of students, and you can either, for high school, you can either apply to the high school of your choice, go to your zone school, or you can take an exam for the specialized high schools. And so, again, even though maybe some people don't view the New York City public school system as a positive, in some ways I feel like it really prepared me for what I was going to face at the next stage, because I was already getting used to putting in applications, doing all of these exams, and at times even also doing like interviews. And so once I would need to apply for college, I'd kind of almost gone through a mock version of it. So I pulled this particular set of bullet points from the website for the specialized high school exams. And back then there were only three, which was Stuyvesant High School, Bronx Science, and Brooklyn Tech. It's now expanded to, I think, like 10 or more. And for any of you that are in New York City, I've included a link at the bottom of this slide that you can click on that gives like a full readout of all of the schools, their specialties, and also some practice exams. But just kind of getting back to the point, they had a list of pointers on the website that I thought were actually pretty applicable to standardized testing in general. And that is, keep up with your schoolwork, because it really is the best possible preparation for any of these exams. And then also make sure that you continue reading books and articles, because this will help you increase your vocabulary. So this becomes sort of more specific to an exam like the SAT or the MCAT, which you need for entering medical school. And one of the things that was pretty nifty that a lot of the schools implemented and a lot of the teachers implemented was that you were required to pick an article, I think it was every Tuesday and every Friday, from a reputable newspaper. So this would include the New York Times, something like the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. These are all, higher-end newspapers that allow that have a more exacting standard in terms of the writing that they publish. And so it's going to be at a level that will absolutely not only increase your comprehension, but your vocabulary and general knowledge for what's going on outside. So this is something that I would recommend for all of the high school students, college students as well, that you be aware of what's going on around you, because a lot of these exams will reference current events and reference your understanding of those current events. And reading the newspaper is really one of the best ways to do that. And of course, a lot of these things are online now, so you don't necessarily have to go out and buy them in printed form. But not only do they have the resources online, but you can also go to your local library and go into the periodical section, and they'll have these newspapers available for you to actually go through. Then the next point is getting used to, again, taking these exams through getting familiar with how they phrase their questions, and that's always going to be through practicing with sample tests. And then, as I pointed out earlier, make sure that you check your answers and read through the explanations for why either the one that you picked is wrong or for why the one that you picked is correct. And so this is, of course, more applicable to multiple choice examinations, but it's just something to take into practice for all of your exams. The other thing, of course, is using study guides, test preparation services, and tutoring opportunities. This is something that I know that not everyone has access to because they can be expensive, but I do know that a lot of schools offer tutoring services through the school based on the subject. There are also some schools that offer either reduced rates for test preparation services or even offer courses for free. And all of this you can actually find out through your guidance counselor. And I know that for me, my guidance and academic counselors, both in junior high school and high school, were very important for directing me towards resources because my parents really couldn't afford for me to do any of the test prep courses for the SAT. And having those resources through my school and was just really important, and it allowed me to not really feel as though I was missing out as compared to some of my peers. So I talked a lot about standardized testing up to this point, but, of course, I got into one of the specialized high schools, and that would be Stuyvesant High School. But one of the things that I think is really important for how you do is just being able to handle high school. And what I mean by that is realizing that your time is going to become more and more precious as you add on extracurriculars, as you sort of add on other school activities. So as I was preparing myself for the next step of going to college, since I really did want to go away to college, how I structured this for myself was through a vigorous course load. And a lot of this was through speaking with my guidance counselor, realizing what classes I wanted to take, which, of course, in high school you have a little bit more leeway in choosing those classes. But even though I was very mindful of the level of courses that I was taking, I also wanted to make sure that I was taking classes that interested me. And so, again, I am not entirely sure sort of where everyone is for who's listening in, but I know that for me, yes, my school offered AP classes, but I didn't necessarily take every single AP class. I sort of realized that, maybe two max 3 per semester/year was what I could handle. I didn't want to completely stretch myself to the point where I just didn't have time to do things that I enjoyed. So this is very much up to you. I can't necessarily tell you the formula, but what I will say is that you should not feel obligated to take, let's say, like a science AP or, some other AP because you feel like it has to be done. You want to take something that is interesting to you, that you actually enjoy, and that you, that you feel that you can excel at. So, for example, I didn't necessarily feel that I was very proficient in physics, so I took my basic physics course, but I decided not to take physics AP. And then at this point is where I felt like time management and my time management skills became really, really important. One of my biggest downsides is that I'm a procrastinator, and this has been true for me even now. And I recognized that that was really holding me back in high school. And I ended up taking sort of an extreme way of handling this, in that because I was losing a lot of sleep because I was procrastinating and not getting my work done on time, I decided during my junior year that I was going to come home from school, go to sleep, then wake up and get my coursework done. And so this ensured that not only was I getting enough sleep, but I was also getting my work done in a set amount of time, and it prevented me from essentially daydreaming or otherwise dawdling. And it also I made sure that I was getting to school on time because I was essentially already up, and so I couldn't be late for school. So that's a very extreme way of handling things. It's not really something that I would recommend, but it also being able to say, okay, well, I only have 2-3 hours to work on this, and I need to get it done in that time slot, really pushed me to sort of stick to my schedule, and it kind of helped me to, moving forward, when I would have sort of more stringent deadlines. So that's just like something that I point out. Now, of course, in high school, you know, you're getting your work done and you're doing your extracurriculars, and I do want to emphasize, like, making sure that high school is still fun and that you're still doing the things that you like, even if it's just like on the weekends or during like specific time points. While you're doing all of this, once you get to your junior and senior years, you're having to think more about the SAT. And again, for some people, this will mean like the college prep courses, but I was able to find a website here presented by U.S. News that has a lot of different resources available that are either lower cost or free that you can use to help prepare yourself. And for me, this came in the form of a few of the test prep books, like the Princeton Reviews and the Kaplan's and however many others that are available at Barnes & Noble. But then there are also like the flashcards that can help you with not only increasing your vocabulary, but just getting very used to some of the words that you'll see on these exams. And this is stuff that you can do, and which I did during the ride that I had to school each day. And then even for the prep courses, which I know can be pretty expensive, there are organizations like College Bound here in Washington, D.C., and I know that there are many others that are available in many different locations that either offer these courses for free or at reduced rates. So I would just kind of encourage you to explore all of the options, and your guidance and career counselors, once again, will be a very valuable resource, not just in the time leading up to college applications, because, you know, those are the times when they become super busy. Even from like your freshman and sophomore year, you know, get to know them, speak to them, because there are so many resources that they are tapped into that you may not know about until speaking with them. That's just another thing that I would point out. So after the whole application process and SATs, and I managed to get into Stanford University. And so this was sort of a fantastic experience. I ended up majoring in human biology with concentration in infectious diseases and epidemiology. So it all ended up kind of coming full circle. What I was initially interested in, infectious diseases, ended up being what I majored in college. So that's great. But one of the things that I wish that I had done while still in school, in which, of course, hindsight is 2020, it's something that I'd like to emphasize for all of you. Up until this point, for going through junior high school, yes, I'd gone through all of these like specialized exams, and to a point I learned how to manage my time, and had learned how to sort of handle the stress levels that can come with sort of all of these academic rigors. One of the things that I did not do before, and it was not necessarily because things were easy, but because I didn't think I needed them, I never really took advantage of tutoring and study sections. And this is something that, in retrospect, I really, really wish that I had done in college, because it just makes things so much easier. So, and this I'm actually going to spend a chunk of time on, because I think it's just so important. The students that do really well in college aren't, yes, they're smart, they're hardworking, but they're also taking advantage of a lot of things that the other students around them are not. And so a lot of the people that were, acing their exams were going to the study sections, were going to the study hours and forming study groups. They weren't just working on their own. I had gotten really used to working on my own, and I kind of wore it as a badge of honor in high school and in college. But in reality, asking for help and getting a tutor, even if you actually are doing really well in the class, is actually, it's not something to look down on. It's going to help you, because a lot of times there'll be instances where you think that you really have mastered the material, and in reality, once you actually have to be tested on that material, there'll be gaps in your understanding, and that won't really become obvious to you until you're working with other students, until you're working with your teaching assistant. And so this is a lot more important for college, especially at some of the bigger schools, but get to know your teaching assistant. So in courses where, there are 300 other students, sometimes in order to get the time that you need to sort of get a grip on the material, it means going to the section that your teaching assistant is heading. And I can't tell you how valuable these people are, because they were specifically hired to help the students grasp the material. So take advantage of that. The other thing is, of course, and I think this is something that I need to emphasize, especially with young women, and it was something that I wish someone had told me earlier on. Do not be intimidated by your professor. In high school, you're very used to a class that's around 30, and it's very, it's a more approachable environment for just going up after class and asking questions, because it's something that you're familiar with. At least for me, when I went to college, it was such a different experience that at times I sort of shrank into the background. I very much did not sit in class. I was not the person up front asking questions. As I got older, I became more comfortable with this, but I feel like it's so important really from the get-go to not be afraid of going up. And I think a lot of the fear is due to feeling like you're going to look stupid, or you're going to ask a stupid question. And of course, there really is no such thing as a stupid question. That question is being asked so that you know either that some principle is going to be explained to you more clearly, or that you know that you have a grasp on the material that's already been presented. So it's just get that out of your head. You're not going to look stupid, and on top of which, this is a way for your professor to actually know your name and face. Especially in college, what you will see is that they have study sections where, or study, quote unquote, study hours, where the professor for the course will say, okay, well, I'm available between 12 and 1 p.m. for anyone to come by. And they will always say, year after year, how many times they are sitting there with no one there, no one comes. So this is a time for you to really be able to get to know them and for them to get to know you. It doesn't necessarily have to be a chance where you're showing them how much you actually have learned in the course. On the contrary, this is a time for, again, you to get certain principles explained, and also you can even speak to them about the research that they're doing or the other work that they're doing outside of this specific course. And I emphasize this because for applications for things that you'll do after school, or even for the applications that you have to do for college, like, it is so important that the person that is writing this recommendation for you knows who you are, not just by your grade, but by the things that are important to you and what makes you you. And this becomes a lot harder in college because, again, the class sizes are so much bigger. So I guess I can say this, especially on the side of someone who has actually looked at applications before, that I can tell the difference between a student that, yes, got an A in the course, but the professor really has never seen them before, and they're just kind of writing a standard recommendation that they would write for anyone else, versus the recommendation from, yes, a student that did well, but the professor knows them, can vouch for them, can say what an amazing person they are, not just based off of the skills that they brought to the course, but for what they feel will actually apply. Just even the effort level and what they put into that recommendation is so much different when they know you. And then also on a side note, a lot of times if they see you coming and they see, this is a chance for them to see basically like how vested you are in this course, in this particular project, they're going to see that you're working hard and you're trying really hard. And so even if you're not necessarily doing well, this may be the difference between, okay, just barely passing or, getting a better grade. I can't tell you how many times I had a course that I just, was really struggling in. But because I was going to the study sections and, they were seeing me sort of dedicate time to this, I would end up having my grade bumped up even over what I thought, I probably should have gotten because they saw me, which is probably more than could be said than for perhaps someone else in the same position who wasn't going. And so I'll end it by, at least this particular slide, by, again, emphasizing, just ask questions. Just do not be afraid to sort of put yourself out there. It's something that I know that I have been knocked on, something that I hope that I have been getting better at as I get older, that I am not afraid to speak up. And especially in the field of medicine and in research, this has become even more important. And yes, I know that my own personality is I tend to be more introverted, but in order to sort of achieve the things that you want to and to get further in life, you're going to have to become less afraid to sort of be out there. So I'll just stop belaboring that point and move on. After college, despite majoring in human biology, I actually was not completely sold on medical school. And in fact, I think I remember very specifically saying that I did not want to do medical school. I at that point was actually pretty tired of sort of the whole application process and standardized testing, and I thought, oh, I'm done with this. But I actually had no idea what I wanted to do. So, and this kind of goes back to an earlier point where speaking to academic and guidance counselors is so important, and also keeping in touch with them is important. So I had an academic advisor at Stanford who I kept in touch with, and I mentioned to her that I might be interested in research, but I had no research experience whatsoever outside of my biology labs. And so she spoke to a colleague of hers at Columbia University and actually managed to link me with her so that I could join her lab as a volunteer. And she took me on for 6 months and trained me in basic research skills on a project in varicella zoster virus. And this is the virus that causes chickenpox and shingles. And that was an amazing experience because not only, did I get my first exposure to bench research and realize that I actually really loved it, but honestly, this is something that would not have happened otherwise if I was not willing to volunteer, and then also if I had not had this relationship with my academic advisor. So I ended up working with Dr. Ann Gershon as well as Dr. Michael Gershon, and though I was volunteering in order to still sort of support myself, I was also a Kaplan tutor, and then in working with them and realizing their passion for research and in helping their patients, I felt, okay, well, actually maybe medical school is the right thing for me. So I was going to apply to medical school, but I did not have all of the courses that I needed completed in undergrad. So that meant that not only was I working in the lab and tutoring, but I also needed to take courses at Columbia to finish out all of my prerequisites. So as you can imagine, this really strapped me for time. I did not have as much time as I had probably become used to, and really brought to the forefront all of my time management skills that I probably had not used for a little bit. So after kind of paring down on my tutoring, what I ended up doing was really learning how to prioritize. And for different people, this means different things, but for me, this meant that, okay, well, no, I'm not going to be able to go hang out with my friends this day. No, I am not going to be able to perhaps continue tutoring this student. No, I need to basically stay home and study. And something that I thought was really helpful for myself, especially since I had sort of so many different things going on at the same time, was to have a task notebook. And so this very much fed into my type A personality, but what I would do is every day, at the start of the day, I would, to get a sense of everything that I needed to do, not only in terms of my lab work, but also in terms of my schoolwork, I would write down all of the projects that I had to do, all the tasks that I needed to complete, and as I completed them, I would check them off, and that gave me basically my sense of fulfillment. And then one of the other things that I would do was to have a printed schedule, and this basically would keep me from spending tons of time on perhaps something that I really loved, like, let's say, my chemistry lab homework, that I would essentially just continue doing and continue adjusting and realize, okay, well, I have an hour to spend on this. I need to spend a half hour reading this chapter, and I will spend another half hour completing this particular homework, while at the same time also making sure that I budgeted in time for study breaks, making sure that, I gave myself time to, okay, well, if I knew that I was particularly tired that day, I was going to give myself time for a 15-minute nap, and I would actually budget that in. So these are all things that, are kind of small, but were actually really helpful for me since my days were just so packed. And so I've included here a few links to sites that I thought have really good resources available for time management, whether it be the printed schedules or even just different suggestions for how you can better manage your time. And I guess kind of going into that, manage your stress level, because a lot of the stress that is involved with schooling and work and everything is just not feeling that you have enough time. When you kind of get a clearer sense of just what's on your plate and how much time you have available to take care of that, it can really help relieve some of that. At least that was the case for me. So once I sort of had this, had all of my time adequately parsed out, I was able to apply for medical school and managed to get it. But one of the things that I will point out is that, of course, like in my own path, I've taken, several exams at this point. Of course, the specialized high school exam, the PSAT, SAT, SAT2s, AP, MCAT, Step 1, Step 2, and I will be going through multiple licensing exams as I become a physician. But, and I probably didn't point this out earlier, when I initially applied for medical school, I applied as an MD. I didn't feel at that time that I needed anything beyond my clinical training, and this is despite the fact that I knew that I loved research. And so I ended up, of course, taking the MCAT, and because I know that there are probably other people listening and who may look at this in the future who are interested in attending medical school, and the MCAT is a step that you have to go through. I am listing here several resources. I'm not going to necessarily go through all the preparation that I had for taking the exam, but there are so many more resources available than what I had. I know that I took one of the prep courses because I felt like they could give me sort of a regimented schedule that I would have to stick to. But I also know so many of my colleagues that studied on their own. Here are some links to a lot of free resources that are now available and can make the process a lot less expensive. But just kind of going back to what I was saying, I applied as an MD, and I did that because even though I knew I loved research, I was a little bit afraid of sort of asking for more. I didn't think that I could actually do a PhD. I felt like it was going to take too long, and perhaps I actually wasn't smart enough or, just hardworking enough. I can't even necessarily go through all of my thoughts for why I chose not to. But after 3 years of medical school, I ended up doing a fellowship program through the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which was what first brought me to the NIH. And it was there that I realized that, I really love research and I want to turn this into a career. And the only way that that was possible and the only way that I finally shook myself out of, not asking for more was through having these amazing mentors. So in the research that I had done previously, I worked with mentors like Dr. Radcliffe and Dr. Yamamoto, who really first opened my eyes to, you can achieve more than what you think you're able to do. And I hope that that's something that I can leave with you all, that, if you're willing to put in the work, if you're willing to sort of dream big, then it definitely is possible. A lot of times it's just fear that holds us back. So I guess kind of to get this closer to wrapping up, where I am currently is I am very close to finishing my thesis project. I have a tentative defense date set for July of this year. And I guess I'll kind of take a little step back, because of me sort of finally pushing myself to ask more, I turned my initial research at the NIH and the fellowship program with Dr. Jacobson into an application for UVA's MST program, and that was how I ended up being accepted into their MD PhD program. And so this, I guess, will finally all reach culmination by hopefully July of this year. And if that actually happens, I'll be able to apply for residency programs in the fall of this year, and then even match next March, which is both exciting and terrifying at the same time. But, everything must come to an end at some point. So I guess that's just my story. But what I hope you all can take away from this is do not be afraid to fail. And this ties into everything that sort of had me hesitating as I move forward, not being afraid to ask questions, and also not being afraid to sometimes be the only one like you in your group. Someone sort of has to start this first step so that others can follow, and, why not let it be you? Then also take advantage of tutors and study sections. Ask for help when you don't think you need it. This can reduce your stress levels so much. Just having other people around you that are, going through the same process with you that can help you out or that have done it before just can really lower that. And then, of course, practice. Get more comfortable with these types of exams when you're doing the questions continuously and you're used to the formatting of both the question and the way that the exam is monitored. Then seeking out mentors and maintaining these relationships. I can't tell you how many times I basically had moments where either I just felt like it was too hard or, I just was just like, I just want to quit. And having these people that have gone through it before, that I have maintained these relationships with, so they know me, they know what I'm going through, so important. They have helped me. They've helped me in realizing just how far I can go. And they are just, and when I think of all the people ahead of me that have done well, that are my peers that have done well, they have had similar relationships. So it's very, very important. Probably most important, and maybe something that I should have put at the bottom of the slide, was make time each day for something you enjoy. When I was talking about the schedules, I said, okay, well, I would make time to take a nap, but I would also make time for something silly, like watching cartoons or, reading like a small portion of my favorite book. No, it didn't take up all of my time, but even having like that 1/2 hour, it would help so much in just keeping me focused and the stress relief that I think it's absolutely essential. The other thing is, don't be afraid to ask for the impossible. A lot of times what may seem impossible to you is actually not that big a deal to whoever you're asking. And especially for young women, it's something that I've noticed in my friends and, again, in myself, that I've oftentimes held myself back because I was so afraid that I was reaching too high or, you don't deserve that. Like, you have to get that type of thinking out of your mind. And then finally, have faith in your path. Not everyone goes from A to B to C to D to E. I was not someone that went immediately, from college to medical school and now to residency. I've had a lot of pit stops along the way, and perhaps a lot of times I've done things in a circuitous route. I think I've ultimately ended up exactly where I need to be, but, my journey is just that. It's mine, and I couldn't be happier with how things have proceeded. Maybe I've taken the long way of doing things, but I've also gained a lot of experience in terms of, test taking, in terms of stress management, in terms of time management that perhaps I may not have gotten had I done things the more traditional way. So that's just for me. I hope that this presentation can be helpful for you. And if you have any questions, you can absolutely direct them towards me. My email address is M as in Monique, R as in rabbit, A as in Anderson, the number 9, and then T as in Tom at virginia.edu. And I'm sure you can also get in touch with the administrators for this meeting and they can also direct your questions towards me. So thank you once again for tuning in, and I guess have a fantastic day.
Yeah, so great. Thank you, Monique. I think you did a great job, and everything you've said is spot on to what the students that are listening or tuning in need to know. So can you all hear me okay? Monique, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I love the quote that you have at the end. I'll just read that out. All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their mind wake in the day to find that it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dreams with open eyes to make it possible. And that's, I think, very true to what you've done over the course of your career. And obviously, there's more to come. So I hope you reach everything that you're hoping to reach in the next year and next year when you, I guess, see match day. And then thereafter.
Yeah, hopefully. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course. A couple of questions for you. And then if anybody else wants to ask any questions, of course, just unmute yourselves. If you can't unmute yourselves, then ask the question in the chat box, and then I'll ask that question to Monique directly. So you talked about tutoring and study sections, and you talked about the value of making sure that you attend the TA sections and then also make sure that the professor knows who you are. A question maybe just a bit personally, I toiled with this when I was an undergrad myself. How do you know that you're adding value to the TA's session, the TA's time, or the professor's time when you actually don't have a question prepared or a topic in mind?
Okay, so I guess firstly, and this is something that I maybe too late in my college tenure, I got this piece of advice afterwards. I would say start off with a goal of maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. Just go through and try to come up with a question. You may feel like it's going to be a stupid question, or that you're not, you're just wasting your time. But if you can come up with a question, maybe even doesn't necessarily have to do with the course material, but it may be something related to what they're doing in the lab or something outside that they're working on. This isn't, the course that they're teaching is not the only thing that the professor is doing. They are probably either writing a book or they're doing some other venture at the school that you could absolutely ask a question about. It shows that you're interested in what they're doing, and you may even gain some insight. Or it could be something that's related. Let's say, for example, a science professor, you can speak to them about, I may be potentially interested in, a summer program or something. They may have information on this. So there are different ways to engage them that don't necessarily have to do with the course itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And actually, one of the things that we did discuss with our students is that the value of networking. So would you say that it's more about the added value of networking rather than the actual session itself? And how do you, use networking today in your life?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely more about yes, you can. These are resources for picking their brain and getting more information from them. But at the same time, as I think I had pointed out, it's so important to have, to be able to build these relationships. And I guess that's kind of the way that I've been talking about it, that they know your face. And I gave the example of asking for recommendations because this is a very tangible way that having those relationships in place makes it just so much easier. If you're going up to a professor and asking for a recommendation, they have no idea who you are, you're going to get the generic recommendation. But if they have spoken to you before, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that you've been there every single week, but you've come in a couple of times and they see you, you've talked to them a few times, it could just even be, oh my goodness, that was such a brilliant way for you to explain that question, I was having such a hard time understanding that, or, oh, this is one way that I managed to tackle this problem. There's a different way to actually tackle it. Was this is this completely wrong? Am I off base? These are just ways for you to sort of begin building those relationships. And I guess I've never considered myself a very good networker because I, again, tend to sort of hang back. But when it's on a subject that I'm really interested in, or even when it's they maybe hit on a point that I've maybe seen in the media, or I've read in an article where I'm like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Talk to them about it. It could be something completely, like, not related to the course, and they may be happy to speak to you about that. So, having them see who you are will just help you so much more. I guess as another example, I did not major in the classics, but one of my very, very favorite courses was Greek mythology. I've always loved mythology, and in college, I had a professor who was just amazing. And even though I ended up not majoring in this, he is someone that I have continued to keep in touch with, not only to speak about, like, the classics, but to just, like, pick his brain. And I've seen him periodically when I've gone back to my school, or when he's randomly at an event in D.C. Both he and his wife have just been such a fantastic support for me as I've gone through life. And he has written, like, multiple recommendations for me for something that is completely, like, unrelated to the classics, but having built that relationship, this is something that I'm able to call on later on. So even the people that you don't think are necessarily going to give you a leg up on the profession that you want to go into, I would still say go after, having that relationship, because you never know.
Yeah, very true. And actually, since we are Speak Mentorship, going back to your mentorship slide, or your mentor slide, you had 2 mentors who you said really were effective and helped you choose or figure out your career path. Why would you say they were good mentors? Because we have our students pairing with mentors. Why or what makes a good mentor?
Okay. So I would say that a good mentor is someone who is absolutely invested in your experience. So the 2 that I had on that slide were both women that I essentially had worked for as a lab assistant. But what, I guess, separated them from perhaps other PIs, like principal investigators, and I also have, like, a picture of my current PI, who I also consider to be a fantastic mentor. The reason why they are so good is that, they push me probably beyond my own comfort zone. So it's great to have people around you that, compliment you and sort of bolster your confidence, but you also need people that are going to push you beyond what you think that you're capable of. And every single one of them did that, whether it was, like, in the lab skills, or even, like, currently my PI, like, he really, the reason why I'm able to do presentations like this today is really due to him. I hate doing presentations, or at least I hated doing presentations, mostly because of how introverted I am. I don't necessarily like going in front of people and speaking, but this was one of the first challenges that he put before me. He wanted me to do a presentation in front of all of these other people in our branch, and I had never done anything like that. And he's like, well, you've never done anything like this, but you're going to do it, and you're going to get comfortable with it, and you're going to get good at it. So, yes, having people that are willing to kind of push you out of your comfort zone, and then having people where they're very invested in your career, if that makes sense. Like, they're doing what they can to prepare you for the next step. And at every single person that I've put on there, like, the reasons why these people were selected for pictures is not only because, yes, I've encountered them in my past, but I've encountered a bunch of other people also. These were people that, were doing, whether it was just, like, speaking to me or directing me towards, like, specific resources, or building up my skill set at that point for the next stage. That is exactly what a mentor is supposed to do, prepare you for what you're going to be doing in the future. And I think that's probably the most important. And also, you want someone who is willing to basically go that extra mile for you. And I think probably, like, I'll point out, like, Dr. Yamamoto and Dr. Jacobson as, like, examples here. Everyone, again, like, that I have and the presentation were fantastic for this, but I can think of like certain instances that sort of shine for me. Dr. Yamamoto, who I worked for at Columbia University, she was the first one who had me seriously thinking about a career in research, and in fact, she loves to remind me that she really wanted me to apply to an MD PhD program right off the bat. But again, a lot of my own self-doubt really prevented me from doing that at that stage. But she had me sort of thinking in a very research mindset. So that's, you know, the scientific method. How am I going to answer this question? What are my controls? What are my positive controls? What are my negative controls? So that's very important in terms of like science. But for all of the work that I was putting in, she would always sit me down and, you know, this isn't something that a lot of people do for lab assistants. She would ask me, okay, well, you know, why are we doing this specific experiment? What's the goal of that experiment? What do we hope to gain from that experiment? And so what would then be the next step? And that, when I think back to it, is so important because a lot of times the assistants around me were maybe making buffers or doing other things which are all really important, but didn't necessarily help you to understand how you're contributing to the scientific process. And having that sort of like sense that, oh my goodness, like I'm really like contributing to the understanding of Huntington's disease, which is what we were working on, really gave me that much more motivation. And in the example of like Dr. Jacobson, he has a very similar mindset where it's just like, okay, well, you want to do this experiment, and I'm far more advanced than I was when I was working with her, so I have more of an understanding, but I still come back to the same questions. You want to do this experiment, but why? And it's very much preparing me for what I need to be doing and how I mentor people in the future. Okay, well, why are you doing this? What do you hope to gain from this? And also giving them the encouragement to sort of achieve. And I guess I've said a lot, but the 3 points that I think are most important is, again, someone that is willing to push you out of your comfort zone, someone who's vested in your path and basically helping you get to that next stage, and someone who always has those lines of communication open. So as I've said, I've continued to stay in touch with all of my mentors, and that has been very important to me because along the way I have needed like those doses of encouragement when I'm feeling like I'm faltering. So those are probably like the 3 most important things of a mentor.
Yeah, and of course, and I appreciate it. I think you did a wonderful job, and I appreciate everything that you've said today, Monique Anderson. If you do want to get in touch with Monique, then you can reach out to us again at info@speakmentorship.com. Monique, do you have an email address where they can reach out to you directly?
Yeah, I think I had mentioned like the @virginia.edu address. Like they can try to contact me at the NIH, but the Virginia one is probably the one that's easiest for me to get to.
Okay, so if anybody wants to get in touch with Monique, then of course we can relay that information at some point later. But again, I appreciate you taking the time to have this conduct this webinar, and I found it very useful, and I'm pretty sure that everyone currently and or people who tune in for the recording will find it useful. So thank you so much, Monique.
Okay, I am happy to help, and I hope that this hopefully that everyone can kind of go through it and still gain some nuggets of wisdom. So.
It's of course it's impressive, and we're impressed with your work. Okay. And cancer awareness selfies are going well as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, take care. Okay, bye.